The call that came over the radio was nothing special. Just a code for a domestic disturbance, an address on a quiet, tree-lined street where all the houses looked the same. Officer Ben, a man with tired eyes who had seen too many long nights, sighed and glanced at his partner in the back of the modified SUV, Rex. A German shepherd with a coat like dark storm clouds and intelligent. Watchful eyes met his gaze in the rearview mirror. The dog's ears twitched, already keyed into the change in Ben's posture. "All right, Rex, let's see what this is about," Ben said, his voice a low rumble. He wasn't expecting much. Sometimes these calls were just loud arguments, neighbors complaining. Other times, they were something worse. You never knew until you arrived. The house they pulled up to was perfectly ordinary. A bicycle with training wheels lay on its side in the front yard. But the silence was wrong. The dispatcher had said a neighbor reported shouting, the sound of something breaking. Now there was nothing. No movement behind the windows, no sound at all. It was the kind of quiet that felt heavy, like a held breath. A man answered the door almost immediately, as if he'd been waiting behind it. He was pale, with a forced smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Officer, thank you for coming, but it's all a misunderstanding," he said, his words coming out in a rush. "My wife, she took our daughter to the park. They're not even here. We just had a little disagreement about weekend plans. It got too loud, I guess." Ben listened, his face neutral. His training told him to look past the words. The man's hands were shaking slightly. He kept glancing back into the dark hallway of the house. "Mind if I come in and have a look around?" Ben asked, his tone polite but firm. It wasn't really a question, Dot. The man's smile stiffened. "Is that really necessary?" "Everything's fine." "Standard procedure, sir," Ben said, already stepping past him. He gave a low whistle, and Rex leaped gracefully from the car, padding to his side. The sight of the large, powerful dog made the man at the door take a step back, his face going a shade whiter. Dot inside. The house was neat but felt cold. Ben's boots sounded too loud on the floor. He saw a woman's jacket draped over a chair in the living room. A coffee mug sat on the table, still half full. In the kitchen, a small, sparkly pink backpack was leaning against the fridge, a cartoon character smiling brightly from its front. Ben pointed to it silently and looked at the man, who was wringing his hands. "She must have forgotten it," the man mumbled. "When they left." Ben didn't reply. He moved further down the hallway, Rex a silent, attentive shadow beside him. The dog's nose was working, sampling the air-lingering smells of breakfast, cleaning products, and underneath it all, the sharp scent of human fear. Rex's posture changed, growing more focused. He wasn't pulling on the leash. He was just intent. "Police department." Ben called out, his voice echoing in the stillness. "Is anyone else in the house?" Only silence answered, but it felt like a lying silence. The air was thick with something unseen. Ben's own senses were on high alert. Something was very wrong here. He made a decision. "Sir, I need you to wait outside with my colleague," he said, leading the man back to the front door where a second patrol car had just arrived. The man protested, but his protests were weak, deflating under Ben's steady gaze. Once the man was in the care of another officer, Ben turned back to the quiet house. "Okay, Rex," he said softly, unclipping the leash. "Search, find." This was their routine. Rex knew what to do. He moved room by room, a sleek, dark shape flowing through the doorway of a home office, a guest bathroom, a master bedroom. He checked under beds, behind curtains. His tail was held low and steady, his movements efficient. He found nothing. Then they came to the last door at the end of the hall. It was slightly ajar, revealing a glimpse of pale yellow walls and a fluffy rug. A child's room. Ben pushed the door open slowly. The room was a snapshot of a little girl's life-colorful drawings taped to the wall. A row of stuffed animals on a shelf. A small bed with a purple blanket. Rex entered first. He took 2 steps in, and then he froze. Every muscle in his body went still. His head cocked, and his ears, which had been swiveling constantly, locked forward, aimed like radar dishes at the closed door of a walk-in closet. A low, almost inaudible rumble vibrated in his chest. It wasn't a growl of threat, but a sound of profound discovery. He looked from the closet door back to Ben, his meaning clear. Here. Someone is here. Ben's heart hammered against his ribs. He slowly unholstered his flashlight, holding it away from his body. The closet door was a plain white slab. He stood to the side, reached out with his free hand, and quietly turned the knob that the door swung inward. In the beam of his flashlight, amidst the hanging shirts and dresses, he saw them. A woman was crouched, one arm wrapped tightly around a little girl, pulling her close. The woman's face was streaked with silent tears, her eyes wide with a primal fear. One of her hands was clamped over the little girl's mouth. The other was pressed against her own lips in a desperate universal signal. She, be quiet. And the little girl, she was just staring with huge dark eyes that held more terror than any child's eyes ever should. She was frozen, a rabbit caught in a spotlight. Ben felt a lump form in his throat. He started to speak, to say the calming words he was trained to say. "It's okay," he began, his voice gentle. "You're safe now. We're the police." But the little girl wasn't looking at him. Her gaze, locked in sheer panic, had slid past the uniform, past the flashlight, and had found the source of the soft, concerned whine coming from beside Ben's leg. She was looking straight at Rex. The world had shrunk to the dark, dusty space of the closet. The little girl could smell her mother's perfume, mixed with the sharp, clean scent of the laundry detergent on the hanging clothes. She could hear the thump of her own heart, so loud she was sure the man outside could hear it. Her mother's hand was warm and shaky against her mouth, and she tried to breathe slowly, the way her mom had whispered to do. Be a mouse, be a quiet little mouse. And the bedroom door had creaked. Heavy footsteps, and a new sound, the click-click-click of claws on the wooden floor. That was the scariest sound of all. It wasn't human. It was an animal sound. In her mind, she saw big teeth and loud barks. She squeezed her eyes shut, pressing her face into her mother's side. Please go away. Please go away. But the footsteps and the clicking didn't go away. They came right up to the closet door. The little girl felt her mother's whole body go stiff as a board. A sliver of light cut into the darkness as the door opened. There was a man there, a policeman. She could see the badge. But all she could focus on was the giant furry shape beside him. A dog, a police dog. It was even bigger up close, with pointed ears and a serious, sniffing nose. The policeman was talking in a soft voice, but the words were just a buzz in her ears. The fear was a cold rock in her stomach. The dog's eyes, dark and intelligent, looked right at her. She remembered something then, a fuzzy memory from a different time, a happier time. A nice police officer had come to her school. He had a friendly dog, too. He had told all the kids what to do if they were ever scared, and a police dog came near. "You don't run," he had said, "and you don't scream. You show them your fist, like this, so they can smell you and know you're a friend. They're very smart. They understand." The memory was like a tiny, faint star in the black fear of the closet. She didn't know if this was the same kind of dog. This dog looked like a wolf. But she had to do something. The silent screen inside her needed a way out very, very slowly, as if moving through thick honey. She pulled her arm free from her mother's tight hug. Her mother glanced down, her eyes asking a silent, terrified question. The little girl didn't look back. Her whole world was those two dark eyes watching her from the floor. She made a fist, just like the school officer had shown her. Her knuckles were small and pale. Trembling, she pushed her arm out, away from the safety of her mother's body, towards the dog. It was the bravest thing she had ever done. She held her breath, waiting for the bark, the growl. The dog, Rex, watched the small movement. His training had taught him to watch hands. Hands could hold weapons, could throw things, could cause harm. But this was different. This small, closed fist wasn't a threat. It was an offering. It was the gesture of a creature that was frightened, but choosing not to fight, not to flee. He could smell the salt of her tears and the sharp tongue of her fear, but he could also see the submission in her posture, the gentle intent. The low rumble in his chest stopped. He took a single step forward, his nose twitching. He didn't look at the officer for a command. This was between him and the child. He lowered his large, blocky head until it was level with her tiny fist. He gave a soft, wet sniff, his cool nose brushing against her skin. Then he did something his training manuals never mentioned. He nudged her fist gently with his nose, a solid, warm pressure. It wasn't a search, it was an acknowledgement. Asterisk, I see you. It's okay, asterisk. He followed it with a slow, sweeping wag of his tail, the fur brushing against the policeman's leg. The effect was instant. A tiny, choked sound escaped the little girl's lips. It wasn't a cry of fear, but a gasp of pure wonder. The rock of terror in her stomach didn't vanish, but it cracked. The monster was not a monster. The monster had a cold, wet nose and kind eyes. Her fist unclenched and her small fingers unfurled, brushing lightly against the smooth fur of his muzzle. Officer Ben saw it all happen. He saw the child's impossible courage, the way her face transformed from sheer terror to a fragile, disbelieving hope. He saw Rex, his tough, all-business partner, become something else entirely, a bridge, a comforter, a safe place. He kept his voice soft, but now he directed it to the mother, whose own eyes were now streaming with tears of relief. "Ma'am," Ben whispered, holstering his flashlight and slowly kneeling down to appear less imposing. "My name is Ben. This is Rex. He's a good boy. No one is going to hurt you anymore. Can you both come out with me? You're safe now." The mother nodded, her body slumping as the desperate strength left it. She tried to stand, her legs wobbly. But the little girl didn't move. She was still connected to Rex, her fingertips resting on his head as if he were anchoring her to the world. She looked from the dog to the policeman, and for the first time, she really saw the officer, not just a uniform, but a man with a gentle face who was kneeling to talk to her. The closet wasn't their prison anymore. The door was open. The path out was right there. But for that one long moment, the little girl stayed right where she was, finding her courage not in the open door, but in the quiet, understanding friend who had found her in the dark. The spell was broken by the mother's soft, shuddering sob. It was a sound of relief so profound it seemed to hurt her. She stumbled forward out of the closet, her legs stiff from crouching for so long. The little girl, however, didn't follow immediately. Her small hand was still resting on Rex's head, as if drawing strength from the solid feel of his skull beneath his fur. Officer Ben stayed very still. He knew any sudden movement could shatter the moment. He kept his voice low, aimed at the mother. "Let's get you both into the living room, okay? Somewhere more comfortable. Is he still in the house?" He meant the man from the door. The mother shook her head, wrapping her arms around herself. He's outside." "With you?" She managed to whisper, her voice raw, "He's with another officer," Ben said firmly. "He won't come near you. I promise." That word promise seemed to mean something. She nodded again, tears flowing freely now. Finally, the little girl moved. She didn't walk so much as she shuffled, her body staying close to Rex. She emerged from the closet like a shadow, clinging to the dog's side. Rex, for his part, seemed to understand his new role perfectly. He didn't go back to Ben. He simply adjusted his position, staying glued to the child's leg, a living, breathing shield between her and the wide, frightening space of the bedroom. The little procession moved slowly down the hallway, the mother first, shaky and wiping her eyes, then the little girl with Rex as her steadfast escort, and Ben bringing up the rear, his heart aching with a mixture of professional relief and a deep, personal sadness for what this small family had endured. In the living room, the other officer was speaking quietly into his radio. He looked up, and his professional mask softened for a second when he saw the little girl attached to the police dog. He gave Ben a small, knowing nod. The mother sank onto the sofa, covering her face with her hands. The little girl just stood in the middle of the room, looking lost. The real world, the bright lights, the strange men in uniform, the aftermath of the storm was too much. She started to shrink into herself, her shoulders hunching. A paramedic team arrived then, a man and a woman with kind faces and big green bags. They approached the mother first, speaking in soothing tones. But when the female paramedic knelt in front of the little girl, the child took a step back, pressing herself against Rex's solid side. She didn't make a sound. She just stared at the floor. "Hi, sweetie," the paramedic said gently. "My name's Anna. I just want to make sure you're feeling okay. Can you look at me?" The little girl didn't move. Her mother, from the couch, said her name softly. "Honey, it's all right. They're here to help." But the child was gone, retreated to a place inside herself where words couldn't reach. She was shutting down, a common reaction to extreme fear. The paramedic glanced at Ben, a look of professional concern on her face. They needed to know if she was hurt, but they couldn't force her. Ben watched, feeling helpless. Rex looked up at the little girl, then at the paramedic, and let out a quiet, worried whine. It was then that the little girl moved. She slowly crouched down, not to the paramedic, but to Rex. She buried her face in the thick fur of his neck. Her small body trembled. Then the words came muffled by his fur, so quiet they were almost lost. But in the hushed room, everyone heard them. "Can he stay with me?" The question wasn't directed at her mother, or at the paramedic, or at Ben. It was whispered directly into the dog's ear, as if she were making a secret pact with him. But its meaning was clear to the adults in the room. In a world that had just become terrifying and unpredictable, this dog was the only thing that made sense. He was safety. He was comfort. He had understood her silent signal when words had failed. All eyes turned to Officer Ben. He was the dog's handler. Rex was department property, a working animal with training and protocols. They had reports to file, the scene to process. The logical thing was to gently explain that Rex had to go to work. But Ben looked at the small, trembling form clinging to his partner. He thought of the clenched fist in the dark closet, the incredible bravery it took to reach out. He thought of the way Rex had responded, not as a tool of the law, but as a creature of profound instinct and compassion. He crouched down himself, getting on their level. He didn't speak to the child right away. He looked at Rex and gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. Then he said one quiet word to his partner. "Settle." It was a command Rex knew well. It meant to lie down and relax. The big dog immediately folded his legs beneath him, settling onto the living room rug with a soft sigh. He was now a permanent, warm fixture on the floor. The little girl, her face still hidden, sank down with him, her small hand never leaving his fur. Ben then looked at the little girl. "He can stay," he said, his voice rough with an emotion he didn't try to hide. "He's not going anywhere. He's right here with you." The effect was like watching a frozen flower begin to thaw in the sun. The tight hunch in her shoulders relaxed, just a little. The paramedic, Anna, saw her chance. She didn't move closer. Instead, she sat on the floor a few feet away, not looking directly at the girl, focusing on her equipment. "You know," she said conversationally, "I think Rex looks pretty comfortable. Maybe I'll just check your mom, and we can all just sit here for a minute." It was permission. Permission to not talk, to not be examined, to just be with the dog. And with that permission, the first real tear escaped. Then another. A quiet cry that was not of fear, but of release. The dam had broken. She cried for the shouting, for the hiding, for the terrible silence in the closet. She cried. And Rex simply turned his head and licked her knee once. A rough, warm touch that said more than any words could. Officer Ben stayed on the floor nearby, watching his partner do a job no training manual had ever covered. In that moment, Rex wasn't just a police dog. He was a bridge back to the world for a little girl who thought she was all alone in the dark. The next hour passed in a blur of quiet activity around them, but for the little girl on the living room rug, the world had shrunk to a small, safe circle. There was the soft texture of the carpet beneath her knees, the low murmur of the grown-ups talking, and the solid, warm presence of the dog. Rex stayed exactly where he had settled, his head resting on his paws, his body a calm barrier between her and the rest of the room. Every so often, he would lift his head and look at her, his brown eyes soft, and she would stroke the smooth fur between his ears. Officer Ben worked around them. He spoke with the other officers in hushed tones near the front door. He took pictures of a broken picture frame in the kitchen without using the flash. He was careful, moving slowly so as not to startle her. He watched the pair on the floor out of the corner of his eye. The paramedic had been able to check the mother, who had a bruise forming on her arm, but was otherwise physically okay. The mother kept looking at her daughter, her own eyes filled with a mixture of relief and a deep, weary sadness. Finally, a kind-faced woman from a social services agency arrived. She sat with the mother on the couch, speaking in a gentle, steady voice about what happened next, a place to stay for the night, people to talk to, steps to take. The mother listened, nodding, but her gaze kept drifting back to her daughter, still silent on the floor. The social worker noticed this. She turned and looked at the little girl with the police dog. She smiled a small, understanding smile. "Sometimes," she said softly, to no one in particular, "the best therapy has 4 legs and a wet nose." It was time to go. The mother stood up, her movements fragile, like glass. "Sweetheart," she said, her voice cracking, "we need to go with this. Nice lady now. We're going to a safe place." The little girl looked up. The fear flickered back into her eyes. The safe circle was about to break. Her fingers tightened in Rex's fur. She shook her head, a tiny, frantic movement. Officer Ben saw the panic rising. He walked over and knelt down again, but he didn't get too close. He addressed the dog, knowing the girl was listening. "Rex, you did good. You did real good today." Then he looked at the little girl. "He has to go back to the station with me for a little while. But you know what? He doesn't like goodbyes much either." The little girl's lip trembled. This was it. The monster would leave, and the scary, shaky feeling would come back. Ben had an idea. It was against a dozen protocols, but his heart had already overruled his head hours ago. "Tell you what," he said, his tone thoughtful, as if the idea had just occurred to him. My car is right outside. Rex has to ride in his special crate in the back. Would you like to walk him out? You could be the one to put him in his car. Make sure he's safe for the ride." It was a lifeline, a task, a way to transition from being protected to being a protector. The little girl looked from Ben to Rex. The dog, hearing the word car, gave a slight thump of his tail. Slowly, she nodded. Ben handed her the leash. It was far too big for her hand, but she clutched it tightly. "Okay, partner," Ben said to Rex. "Heel." Rex stood up smoothly. The little girl stood with him, the leash connecting them. Together, they walked toward the front door, with Ben following a step behind. The evening air outside was cool. The flashing lights of the police cars painted the quiet street in streaks of blue and red. To the little girl, it didn't feel scary now. It felt important. She was leading the big police dog. Officers paused what they were doing and watched them pass, their faces soft. No one said a word. They just let the moment happen. They reached the big SUV. Ben opened the back, revealing the heavy plastic crate. Rex knew the drill. He usually jumped right in, but this time he hesitated. He looked at the little girl. "Go on," she whispered, giving the leash a little tug, just like she'd seen people do with dogs in the park. Rex obeyed. He hopped up into the crate and turned around, facing her. Ben reached in and unclipped the leash from his collar. The connection was physically broken. The little girl stared, feeling the loss immediately. Ben was about to close the door when the little girl stepped forward. She stood on her tiptoes, reaching through the crate door. Rex leaned his head forward. She didn't hug him. He was a working dog, and some part of her sensed that wasn't right. Instead, she simply placed her small hand flat on the side of his face, feeling the strong bone and warm skin beneath his fur. She held it there for 3 long seconds. "Thank you," she whispered, so quietly only the dog could hear. Then she stepped back. Ben closed the crate door with a soft click and latched it. He looked down at her. "You helped him do his job today," he said. "You were very brave." She didn't feel brave. She felt small and tired, and like she wanted to cry again. But she also felt a tiny glowing ember of something in her chest. It wasn't happiness. It was the memory of not being alone. Ben walked her back to where her mother and the social worker were waiting by a calm, ordinary car. As her mother helped her into the back seat and buckled her in, the little girl kept her eyes on the police SUV. Through the window of the crate, she could see the dark shape of Rex, watching her dot as their car pulled away from the curb, heading toward an unknown safe place. The little girl pressed her hand against the cool glass of the car window. She didn't wave. She just kept it there until the police SUV, with its special passenger, turned a corner and was gone. Inside his crate, Rex let out a long sigh and lay down. His work was done. But for both of them, the quiet bond forged in a dark closet had changed something fundamental. For the little girl, the world now contained a kind of goodness she could touch and remember. For the dog, his job had suddenly grown to include something much bigger than finding people. It was about finding a way to bring them back from the edge of fear. Officer Ben started the engine, glancing in the rearview mirror at his partner. He knew, without a doubt, that this was a day neither of them would ever forget. For the next few days, Officer Ben and Rex fell back into their normal routine. They patrolled the streets, answered calls, trained in the yard behind the station. But something was different. Ben would catch Rex looking at him sometimes with a quiet, expectant expression, especially when they drove near the street with the tree-lined houses. Ben felt it too. The image of the little girl, her hand on Rex's face through the crate, was stuck in his mind. The job was often about containing bad situations, but this This felt unfinished. He found himself talking to the police counselor, a woman who helped officers deal with tough calls. He told her about the closet, about the fist, about the whispered question. That dog, the counselor said, did more for that child in 5 minutes than I could do in 5 weeks. Sometimes the healing part is just as important as the rescuing part. Meanwhile, in a small sunny apartment provided by a family shelter, the little girl and her mother were trying to piece their world back together. The little girl had started talking again, but only in short sentences. She had bad dreams. She jumped at loud noises. Her mother tried everything to comfort her, but a shadow seemed to follow her daughter, a quietness that hadn't been there before. The social worker visited regularly. She'd brought coloring books and a stuffed animal, a fluffy dog that now sat untouched on a shelf. The little girl would just look at it, then walk away. Then, one afternoon, there was a knock at the apartment door. The social worker was there, but she wasn't alone. She had a smile that reached her eyes. Standing slightly behind her was Officer Ben, out of uniform in a simple polo shirt and jeans. And sitting politely by his side was Rex, wearing a simple collar and leash. Not his official harness. "There's someone here who wanted to say hello," the social worker said, her voice light. The little girl, who had been sitting at the kitchen table, froze. Her eyes went wide. For a second, her mother worried it was too much, that the sight of the dog would bring back the scary memories. But then, something amazing happened. The little girl's face, which had been so still and careful, lit up. It was a real, true smile, the first one her mother had seen in what felt like forever. She didn't run. She slowly slid off her chair and took a few steps forward. "Can I?" she whispered, looking up at Ben. "I think he'd be pretty upset if you didn't," Ben said, his own smile crinkling the corners of his eyes. He gave Rex a soft command. "Go say hello." Rex didn't need to be told twice. He walked forward, his tail waving slowly like a flag of peace. He stopped right in front of her and dipped his head, offering it to her, just like he had in the closet. This time there was no fear. Her small hands came up and buried themselves in the thick fur of his neck. She didn't cry. She laughed. It was a tiny, breathy sound, but it was a laugh. She knelt down and Rex lay down, rolling onto his side so she could better reach his belly. He let out a grumble of pure doggy contentment. Ben and the mother watched from a few feet away. The mother had tears in her eyes, but they were happy tears. "She hasn't laughed since," she began, and just shook her head, unable to finish. "Thank you." "Don't thank me," Ben said, watching his partner soak up the affection. "He wouldn't have let me not come. He's been moping around the station." The visit lasted about 30 minutes. They didn't talk about what happened. They talked about dogs. Ben told the little girl about how Rex loved apples but hated oranges, about how he was scared of the vacuum cleaner at the station, about how his favorite toy was a simple knotted rope. The little girl told him, in her quiet voice, that she thought Rex was the best dog in the whole world. When it was time to leave, there were no tears from the little girl. She seemed settled. She gave Rex one last, long hug around his neck. "Bye, friend," she whispered Ben, and Rex came back the next week. And the week after that, it became a ritual. Rex's official duties at the station didn't change. He was still a sharp, capable police dog. But Ben had quietly gotten permission from his sergeant for these community follow-up visits. The sergeant had heard the story, seen the change in Ben's own demeanor, and simply said, "That's good police work. Keep it up." On the third visit, the little girl was waiting by the door. She had drawn a picture. It was a crayon masterpiece, a big brown dog sitting next to a small, smiling girl in a yellow dress. There were no dark closets, no police cars. Just the two of them under a bright yellow sun. In wobbly letters at the top, it said, "My friend Rex." Ben felt a lump in his throat. He took the picture reverently. "This," he said, "is going right on the fridge at the station, where everyone can see it." The story, of course, spread through the precinct. Other officers started stopping by the kennel area, not just to see a working dog, but to say hello to Rex, the dog who carried quiet courage in his eyes. The department began to talk, really talk, about the dual nature of their canine partners. They were tools for detection and protection, yes, but they were also bridges. They could calm a panicked victim, comfort a traumatized child, soften the hard edges of a terrible day. A few months later, the department made it official. They created a new secondary certification for certain dogs, community support, canine. Rex was the first. He now had a second, softer leash and a vest that could be swapped out. One vest for patrol, one for visits to schools, hospitals, and sometimes to quiet apartments where a little girl was healing. The change wasn't just on paper. The change was in the little girl who now slept through the night. It was in her smile, which came more easily. It was in the way she would point at any German shepherd on TV and say, "That's a good dog like Rex." The change was in Officer Ben, who now saw his job not just as stopping the bad, but as nurturing the good that had to grow afterwards. And the change was in Rex himself. He still worked with fierce focus, but when the softer vest came out, his whole body language would shift. He'd become calmer, more deliberate, as if he knew a different kind of duty was calling. He had always been good at finding people, but now he had learned he was even better at helping them find their way back. And it had all started with a moment of silence in a dark closet, and a little girl brave enough to show a closed fist, offering her trust to a creature she hoped could understand.